All right, we will get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kayla Britt, the CQV track lead of this Career Catalyst series. As most of you know who've been here before, this series is part of our BioBuzz Talent Lab, which is a platform designed to help life science professionals like you access exclusive job opportunities, career development resources, expert advice, and industry events like this. This 45-minute program is broken down into two parts. We'll have a presentation and then a Q&A. So we will be recording here shortly for the presentation portion, but we will stop so you can ask your questions at the end. If you can please mute yourselves if you're not already muted. And then before we get started, I want to thank Workforce Genetics and BioTrack. And then we are very excited today to have Stephanie White. She is the COO and Quality SME at Alliance Bio, has a very impressive career with deep CQV expertise, especially in digital validation. She is the C&Q Community of Practice Steering Committee Chair, active contributor to the ISPE Digital Validation Committee, and also was a co-author on the recent Digital Validation Good Practice AI guidance document. And most recently, she was even featured in the March-April edition of Pharmaceutical Engineering magazine, highlighting her experience and contributions to the field and to ISPE. So without further ado, we are so happy to have Stephanie, who will present today on computerized system assurance and the shift our field is making from the V model to critical thinking.
Hey everybody, welcome. I'm excited today to share with you something that's near and dear to my heart about ditching the V model and embracing the quality risk management components for commissioning and qualification. I'm hoping that today I will provide you with some information about how you can apply this to your work if that's what you do. And hopefully you will learn something from the case study that I have done with the company that I'm currently working for. Next slide, please. So as we know, for years, about 30, we've had a traditional C&QV model, which gave us a lot of structure and comfort. You go from URS to design, you build, you do your IOQ, then PQ, and it did help a lot of companies stay licensed and compliant, but we have here bloated protocols, testing that didn't always link clearly to patient risk, endless IOQ scripts on non-critical stuff, and which has led to inefficiencies and resulted in getting medicines to market at a glacial pace. So this has been around for a long time, the V model. I've done many webinars on it, moving towards the quality risk management process. And a lot of times when I do polls with folks that I have on the call, they say they do a risk-based approach, but then I'll ask another question about using the V model, and they say they still use the V model. So it is, I get a lot of different responses in polls, and it's my passion to move people from using the typical approach to more streamlined approach to help get our patients their drugs faster. Next slide, please. So even regulators in industry, they've been very clear that the science and risk-based approach C&Q is not a nice to have, but it is a clear expectation. The quality risk management process, the ICH Q9, is embedded across the life cycle, and it focuses on product and process understanding. So by implementing a science and risk-based approach in our C&Q methodologies, we will ensure regulators that we really understand our process. And I'm going to go through a case study which will show you how to do that. Next slide, please. So this, if you haven't read this document, the Commissioning and Qualification Baseline Guide 5 from ISPE, Volume 2, this is where it comes in. In this document, it clearly describes how to implement a system risk assessment where critical aspects such as critical design elements, critical quality attributes, and critical process parameters are identified as we go through each system, and we're able to assign risk elements to critical process parameters and then design elements to mitigate the risk of those critical process parameters to the critical quality attributes that have been identified as being risk to product quality. It also leverages good engineering practices and has some basis on the ASTM E2500 standard, which was just recently revised, I believe, last year to include or give definitions around what a system owner is and to provide some other definitions around the risk-based approach. So all these documents kind of flow together to create this process that we can use in our commissioning and qualification practices to reduce the level of testing, but it's based off critical aspects and critical design elements that we test in qualification, and every other aspect or business need is tested in commissioning, and we can leverage that and even vendor testing for our qualification. And it helps to move projects along faster. It reduces time. It reduces the cost of validation and helps the project move along at the end to get across the finish line so that we can start producing our products quicker, because our patients are waiting for us to get these drugs out the door. Next slide, please. So one of the key aspects here is to move mindsets. You need to move people from that V model mindset into a more risk-based verification approach, which means testing what truly matters, which is product quality and patient safety. We remove non-value added IOQ testing and steps from protocols, and we let engineering own more of the good engineering practice and commissioning space. This way, our quality partners can truly focus on just the critical aspects. Now, there is a caveat to this. Probably before you use this particular approach, it's very imperative that you do a maturity assessment on your engineering department to see where they're at from a standpoint of the documentation that they create, and if it would indeed be good documentation practices that we could utilize that testing into our qualification packages. So having a really mature engineering department, it's a lot easier to move into a quality risk management program. And if they're not that mature, there are ways to get around that. And I can show you in the case study, the particular company I'm working for, they don't even have an engineering department at the site. And so I've had to really kind of follow the bouncing red ball across user requirements all the way through our IOQ efforts in order to make sure that the site was prepared to present this testing to a regulatory. Next slide, please. So quality risk management implementation, again, you typically in the V model, you would test in commissioning, and then now you're testing and testing qualification. So instead of testing twice, it's moving to testing once. Being able to take the testing, I don't know what happened. I think this slide got moved. Okay, move from testing, the testing that was done twice into moving it to once. So we're able to utilize that testing that was done by our engineering partners or even vendors, as long as we also have a good vendor qualification program. It's all about having some good foundational programs set in order to be able to pull this documentation forward into qualification and use it. Use commissioning as good engineering practices deliverables as real evidence for qualification testing based on this quality risk management. And one important thing is to rethink system boundaries and classification. You need to define your critical aspects, which are your critical quality attributes and your critical process parameters early and clearly to mitigate the risk. Usually this is occurring during your design phase in your project. You need to be able to identify systems and what their CQAs and CPPs are, so you can create design elements to mitigate the CPPs of having an adverse effect on your CQAs. I know I'm using a lot of terminology here or acronyms, so hopefully if you don't know what these represent, we can discuss them at the end. Also, reshape templates and SOPs so that risk-based thinking is the default. So you can't just go from your V model program and all of a sudden you're starting to do quality risk management, because your procedures that govern your commissioning and qualification program probably are not set up to be part of a quality risk management program. So it's very important in your, if you're not going to update and you're doing a pilot project, for example, and you're not going to update your C&Q program SOPs, it's very important that in your C&Q project plan that you identify this strategy, how you're going to go about doing it, and so that you can make sure that you can implement this maybe one pilot project before you say, okay, let's go in and change all of our SOPs to reflect this quality risk management program, because a lot of times our SOPs are not written that way. So they would need to be maybe written that way at a later time, but using your CQV project plan in order to move forward using a quality risk management approach with that strategy very clearly defined in it and approved by the quality department on your project. Next slide, please. Could you click the button again? So this is just a delivery process. I know that it's a little much of an eye chart, but this was recently revised and updated in the ASTM E2500 update, which just went out. But basically, you're trying to define your CQAs and CPPs, as you can see in the blue boxes on the left, if you can squint a little bit. You have your operational manufacturing process, your construction control strategy, and data integrity, and all these elements that need to flow into your program. At the beginning, you take your regulatory requirements, environmental health and safety requirements, user requirements, product and process requirements, if you know them. I'm working on for a CDMO right now, and they don't really know their product requirements. They have more of a platform, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is scalable to whether you have an established product or you're a CDMO. All that information filters into your user requirements, which should be written first. These fall under the category of good engineering practices and your manufacturing process control strategy, which then filters into your design, doing your design qualification, your systems risk assessment is part of that. The system risk assessment usually feeds back into user requirements once you get those established, and I'll show you in the case study how that works. And then once you complete all those activities and get to your final design, you can then generate your protocols or verification documentation, however your company calls it. Just make sure that you identify and define what those documents are so they're clear to regulators and how they relate to the regulatory definitions. And then you can move into your operational status once you have accepted and released all these systems. So our system risk assessment is going to enable identification of risk failure during operation, resulting in critical process parameter control failure. If you click it again. Classification of risks to determine those that are unacceptable and require mitigation controls in place to reduce the elimination of risk. And what this means is, as we look at the example, you're going to see that these risks are either classified as you need a design element to mitigate the risk, or if you're at a point in your design review where you cannot or maybe there's no design that you can do to mitigate that risk, you'll have to put a procedural control in place to help reduce that risk of that CPP impacting the CQA. Recommend potential risk control measures through design automation and procedures, which I just mentioned, and I think there's another one. And then if you find that after you do your risk assessment that you are missing requirements in your URS, so maybe you have a design element that was not covered in your URS, you would need to go and update your URS. So it's very imperative not just to do the risk assessment, but you need to map it back to every single requirement in your URS that it has quality impact. Next slide, please. providing a direct link and traceability. So I just mentioned that. So yeah, providing a direct link between your risk profile and your qualification. So here's a case study. I'm currently working at a site that is building a sterile fill manufacturing facility, and they are currently a laboratory, so they don't really know or have a good basis and background for um, moving in from a GLP to a GMP situation. So I've been working on this project for a few years, and we had a very tight timeline, a very tight budget. And so I thought this would, and of course they had no SOPs to govern their C&Q structure. So I wrote a CQV plan that I wrote this plan that has this whole governance structure in it so that they would be able to use the risk-based approach. And so the way you start it, even if you're have a very immature engineering department or no engineering department in my case, or you have a very mature engineering department, once your design documentation gets to a point where you have a decent functional spec and a set of drawings for your systems and your system boundaries have been defined, you can take these documents, and these are your inputs into creating your system risk assessment matrix. So here I have a functional spec, I have a drawing. I'm going to go through a quick example for a WFI system that we did a risk assessment on. We identified all of our CQAs, which are critical quality attributes, and our critical process parameters that we can monitor to make sure that they don't impact the CQA. And I can show you how we established our design elements, which are basically setting up our alarm structure once we've identified our critical components. So sometimes when you do a traditional V model, you may do a system level impact assessment, and then you may do a component level impact assessment. But the beauty of the system risk assessment are those are all kind of combined into one document here, and you'll see what I'm talking about as we move through this example. Next slide, please. This is a bit of an eye chart. This is actually a template that's in the back of that guidance document that I showed you, the ISPE C&Q guidance document, baseline guide volume 5. And it's in that document that was shown up at the front, and you can pull this out. What I had to do, however, was I had a group of folks that were very FMEA oriented. I mean, they knew FMEAs, but they didn't really understand how this particular system risk assessment aligned with that. So I kind of had to walk them through this. So basically what you do is you take your functional spec, that first very left column, I don't know if this can be blown up a little bit or anything, but that very first column is the requirement. And is the requirements column, or like you number them like 1 to whatever. And the next column, operational sequence, is like the operational sequence or your system boundary of your system. So a WFI system, water for injection, it typically has a generation system, a storage tank, and a distribution system with it. I did this risk assessment based on all three, but just so you wouldn't have a horrible eye chart to look at, I'm just going to show you the generation. So the operational sequence for this is just the WFI generation. And then the process description is we walk through every single step. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every step or the sequence of operations for that WFI system. And I get that from the functional spec and put in here. Our system CQAs, so you can see that if you look at the very first requirement is you have feed water coming in, basically is what it's saying. There's really not a critical quality attribute on your feed water because as it goes through and gets distilled through or becomes whiffy as it goes through the system, then it's going to have a critical quality attribute. But when the feed water first comes in, it doesn't have that. So your system CQA would be not applicable. However, we determined that it does matter that the flow rates and the pressures that come in from a mechanical standpoint. And so we deemed that a system CPP could potentially be pressure, even though that it is not directly affected by a CQA. And so the next column header says the impact on system CQA CPP, is it direct or indirect? Well, we picked indirect, and the reason being is because the feed water coming in mechanically depends on the pressure or flow rate coming in, but it doesn't have any quality attribute that it impacts. And then the next column, how can the system CQA be impacted? Well, it's not impacted because there isn't one at this point in the process. So it's NA. And then the recipe parameter that we're going to be monitoring is pressure, because from a mechanical standpoint, pressure is important going into the system. And is there an associated alarm? There were associated alarms with pressure, but they're not critical alarms. And I'm going to show you a little something extra that I did dealing with alarms, where we identified whether they were mechanical, process critical, or quality critical alarms. So yes, there were alarms in the functional spec based off this pressure of the feed water coming in, but it did not impact any critical quality attribute. And then the design control, this is where we have how we're going to detect or control the risk. We're going to have a design element in place, and that's that we're going to have a component where I mentioned earlier that the beauty of this is that you're identifying your components and you're assessing them to see how they affect any type of parameters or quality attributes, or any attributes at all of the product running through the system at that point in time. And so here we've identified that, yes, we need a component to measure the pressure, and we're going to associate alarms with that, but they're mechanical. They're not quality critical alarms, but we wanted to make sure that we captured all this information. And I went in great detail with this, just with quality was sitting in the room when we did this. And I'll talk a little bit about maybe how you set this up later. And then we said that we would also control this with the procedural control. We're going to generate an alarm management SOP so that we know when an alarm such as a mechanical alarm goes off, how we're going to treat it versus an alarm that's more quality critical. And of course, we have a comment section if you want to add something. And then we risk rank these. And the ISPE Baseline Guide 5 for commissioning and qualification has a risk ranking table in it of high, medium, or low. And your goal in the whole process is to get your risk to low through these design controls that you put in place. If you put a design control in place, and it does happen that you put a design control in place, that the risk may be medium or it may be high even after a design control. So you could mitigate that maybe with a procedural control, or if you can't mitigate the risk at all through design or procedures, then you would just have to get your management and quality to accept that as being a high risk element. And the Baseline Guide 5, if you read that, it will actually talk about this, how you go about doing that. So those are just our columns at the top. And as you go through, you can see, at least for WIFI generation, if you go down, I think we identified one system critical quality attribute, which was line item 7 for purity. It must align with the USP and EU regulations. And this came out to be like, it's a direct impact if we do not meet these USP pharmacopoeia requirements. And so then we have some alarms associated with them. Those are for conductivity. Let's see, temperature. So we saw that the conductivity and temperature, I guess it's the return temperature coming from the loop, is going to cause us to have, well, actually this is the generation system. So it's really the water comes in as feed water, goes out the end as WIFI. You're going to sample it, and it needs to meet these requirements for conductivity and temperature. This was a hot loop, so it needed to be above 80 degrees C at generation and obviously fall within the lines of that. And so we developed an SOP on about how to operate the water system and how to take the samples at the end. So you can see that doing these things, and we say we're going to verify that SOP in the protocol. So you can see that when you do these risk assessments, not only are you have the people in the room should be a facilitator. I was the facilitator. I created this, and I have SMEs in the room. The SMEs would be engineering, quality, and any process SMEs that you need in the room to sit down. And we went through the FS. We went line by line through the drawing, followed the water all the way through, and we saw every valve it went through, every instrument it went through, and how we were going to identify all these steps in that system in order to see, well, what's really critical to quality. And as you can see, only for the generation system, quality critical at the end of generation is that you have WFI that meets USP standards. So every other part of it came out to be maybe a mechanical, or we didn't really need to look. I think number 6, there was a level indicator and pressure that we needed to monitor because WFI is being generated in stills, and we needed pressure relief valves and alarms to go off if our pressure went too high, because this is a hot loop and pressures can build. So there's a little bit of safety included in this. There's a little, it's kind of like a catch-all document for your critical components, your critical alarms, your your critical elements that could be safety factors. So it's really a really concise one-stop document. And yes, this was the very first one I did with these folks, and it did take us about 10 hours to do this one. So people might go, oh my gosh, you had a lot of workshops. We would try to do this in 2-hour chunks. Then we went down to an hour and a half based on people's time. But once I got them through the first risk assessment, the other risk assessments that we did for like parts washers, autoclaves, a fill line, and lyophilizers went very quickly. They understood the process. And then we were able to go through and do these in about, gosh, maybe an hour and a half, actually, it would take to get these done. And the beauty is once you have these done, you can use these as models. So in the future, if you have other systems that come in, you can pull up this base model and kind of go through it and look at your user requirements to see how that other maybe parts washer or autoclave or other piece of equipment is going to be used. And then you can update these and reuse them over and over and over again with just the tweaks for the intended use of that system that you're bringing in, which is the really cool part, is that you can use them over and over. And as you can see, as I've gone through this with you, I'm hoping your eyes aren't glazed over, but you really get an understanding for what exactly are our critical quality attributes, what exactly are our CPPs, and what can we design to mitigate the risk of that CPP getting out of range to impact our product quality. And you identify all your critical components, your alarms, and everything else that goes with it. So it's really a pretty neat process. I think one of my, and I have a passion for these. I don't know why. There's maybe something wrong with me that I like to do these things. But the one I think I was one of the first ones that I did with a group of another company that I worked with. We had quality in the room, validation, engineering. As we went through this and we left the meeting, the validation person said, like, this was the most productive 2 hours I've ever spent at work. I really understand the system now and what we need to focus on. So, that's my goal. And so if you do these right, and really take some time to get through and understand the process, it really makes your qualification easy. This is going to be real easy to explain in an audit. So that's why I had quality in the room. So they actually understood what was going on and could understand when they received an engineering or validation document to approve, they understood what we just did. Next slide, please. So this is not included in the book. This is something that I've done. What I did is I take all the alarms that we've identified in the eye chart that was the slide prior, and I take them and I turn them into there. We have like in the I've seen two sets of alarms before, the quality critical, and there's a definition to what that is. Process critical, there's a definition. But because my folks had an immature engineering department, we wanted to encompass all the alarms that were in the specification. So we went in and we added all the mechanical alarms. Now, quality critical, those are the alarms that are going to trigger a direct impact on your critical quality attribute. And if you remember the matrix in the prior slide, there was that direct or indirect impact. This is where you determine if that particular element or step in your process has a critical impact to product quality. And so if it does, if you have the word direct in your matrix, then it is a critical quality critical alarm. So I went to every step. You see the reference. I have 1, 2, 6, and 7 where alarms occurred. And there were indirect was mechanical. It also could be process critical. And so there were 3 elements that were indirect. And so they were mechanical alarms. And I listed the alarms. We put it doesn't impact a system quality attribute. And it does impact a system process parameter, which was pressure, level pressure, level pressure. And then the one that was quality critical was the fact that we had a purity as our system critical quality attribute, and we have to follow the USP and compendial for conductivity and temperature. And then it puts the alarm here, what they are, and you can put any comments in as you would like. This is great to hand over to your automation team or your calibration team. Now that you have this kind of in a matrix, they know what we've identified as quality critical instruments. They know which ones to put on a calibration schedule. Our automation team knows which alarms that we're going to be needing to trend and monitor for criticality. And so it's just a really nice little tight document where we can do these things. Next slide, please. Now, when you get to the end of these, I usually do a summary report. And in that summary report, I take all of the elements and I map them back to the URS requirement. So you can see that I have these elements listed, the system risk assessment reference. That's why we have those numbers in them. And then we put down what the operational sequence was. I just take these columns out of the matrix and place them in this table for the summary report. And I put what design controls that we're going to use to mitigate these risks. And then I put what number user requirements that they go to. And as you can see, the user requirements on the right-hand side for this URS, we have a requirement, we have a type, and we have a source. This template for writing URSs is also part of the ISPE Baseline Guide 5. It talks about taking your requirements and determining if they're business requirements or quality requirements, with your quality requirements being those requirements that need to be qualified or need to appear in some type of qualification document, whether you've deemed that would be a commissioning document, maybe if you have a mature engineering department, or you may pull those elements forward into an actual IOQ protocol if you have an immature engineering department. And that's what we did here because we didn't have an engineering department, so can't really assess them. So next slide. Yes, next slide, please. Sorry. So here, no, back one. A system risk assessment. Here is a test case out of a protocol. So what we did was in the WFI system total, not just the generation system, but along with the tank and the distribution system, when we did the entire risk assessment for all those boundaries, we determined that there were about 6 critical instruments that were needed to be monitored, trended, sampled, and things of that nature. So we identified those, and those 6 elements we pulled forward into a protocol. So here we have just an IOQ test case where we have our critical components. Remember, I told you instead of doing a component assessment, the system risk assessment helps us identify those critical components. And then what we did, because we had an immature engineering department, or maybe the vendor documentation wasn't what we wanted, we pulled those elements forward into a protocol. So an auditor would be able to take a user requirement, it would be a quality requirement, they would be able to open up the system risk assessment and go, okay, this quality requirement are these critical elements, these critical alarms, and then we pull that information forward into an IOQ. So you can literally follow the bouncing ball or trace it from user requirement to system risk assessment to protocol. And then of course you would have your trace matrix at the end, but you can see that all the elements that we deem critical or quality critical appear in our protocols. You don't have to do this, but because we have, again, an immature engineering department, we decided that it would be best if we could literally show like quality, because they're going to defend this. They're going to be the ones sitting in the room. Our quality department could understand the quality requirement from the URS, how it aligns or is mapped to the system risk assessment, and we've identified our critical components and our design elements that we're going to test in our protocols. And then here's the test case in the protocol. It's a beautiful, nice package to hand over to an inspector, and quality can actually defend it. They know what they're talking about because they've been involved in the entire process. Next slide, please. So if your CNQ approach still looks like the classic V model from the 90s, this might be the moment to ask, are we qualifying for comfort and tradition, or for risk, science, and patience? So remember them. Our patients are waiting. So make sure that you can implement this quality risk management process. It makes protocols much thinner, and it makes the qualification process go much faster, and you can get to releasing your systems for GMP manufacturing to get that product out the door to our patients. So I appreciate your time. Thank you. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. You can scan this QR code and request a connection. I'd love to connect with you. And I work for ABio. They're a consulting firm in Maryland. And you can also contact me at that email address. So thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'd love to take those now.